Hiya beans, bit late with a story tonight, been really busy today. I'm just going to read part of chapter 6 for you. It's called Skinned and Buried. Whoa, that looks a bit scary. There's, look, somebody right up that tree there looking down at that house. Could be Barney. Let's have a read and see. It says Barney was up an elm tree, must be him. Barney was up the elm tree. It was the one that grew very close to Grandfather's house. It had a swing on one of the lower branches, and near the top there was a hole where the jackdaws usually made a nest each year. Barney had climbed up to see how they were getting on this spring, and they had already laid one egg. He climbed higher among the springy branches at the top, and clung there and let the wind blow him to and fro. He could see the house almost below him, and the garden with a few daffodils and crocuses showing, and the wood and copses where the trees still showed their bones but were beginning to cover them with new green leaves. He heard Lou's voice somewhere about the house calling for him, but he didn't answer. I bet she can't find me, he thought, and grinned to himself. Then he saw Grandmother and Lou in the yard going out to the car with shopping baskets. Grandmother called, "Barney, where are you?" Barney chuckled to himself. He could see them, so they could see him if they really looked. But Grandmother and Lou got into the car and drove off, and he could see it going away along the lanes towards the village. They'd gone off shopping and left him. It wasn't fair. He was so cross he nearly fell off his branch. Excuse me. Then he thought it was no good trying to stamp your feet when they are wedged in the fork of a branch, and anyhow, he might as well stay up here instead of going shopping. He'd really rather be up a tree in the wind than go shopping. He could see ploughed fields with a tractor crawling over and the bare earth pulling a harrow. He could see black and white cows on the pasture. He could see chicken houses and those very small bits of yellow like grains of sand running about, must be baby chicks. They're so tiny they look like grains of sand because he's so far away. He could see a big black car coming along the lane towards the house. That was funny. It had stopped and pulled off the road into the copse near the chalk pit. He could see two men get out and walk towards the house. They wore dark hats and mackintoshes and didn't look like country people. Had he seen them before? Yes, he had. They had come to the door once before, and he had answered the doorbell. They had asked him if his grandmother had got any silver or jewels to sell, and he had told them that of course Grandmother had lots of silver and jewels, but he didn't think she would want to sell them as she got some money already. And then Grandmother came out and told them she didn't want to sell anything, thank you, and if she did, she wouldn't sell it on the doorstep, and she had seemed quite cross. And now the men were coming back again. Well, there was nobody at home, and he was staying in his tree. One of the men stayed in the lane and the other went and knocked on the door. Of course nobody answered. The man knocked again and waited a long time. Then he went round to the back door and tried that. It was not locked. The man looked about him, opened the door and went in. Barney's heart fluttered and his legs felt funny, as if he had nearly fallen off his branch, though he was clinging on with all his might. That man had gone into Granny's house when he shouldn't have. He must be a thief. He would take all the silver and drive off with it in his car, and Barney was all alone up a tree, and though he could see the countryside for miles around, he couldn't see a human being except the tractor driver fields and fields away. There was no one who could help him in time. Yes, there was. Barney started climbing down. Trying not to be too shaky and excited, he had to go down the side of the tree that was away from the house so that he wouldn't be seen, and the best handholds and footholds were on the house side. Barney slipped and slithered the last bit and landed among the bushy twigs that grew out of the bottom of the trunk. He crouched there for a few moments, hoping he had not made too much noise. Then he crawled out and ran as hard as he could across the paddock towards the copse. He scrambled over the fence and lay among the brambles there, panting and looking towards the house. He could see no signs of anyone coming after him, so he got up and plunged through the copse. "Look out, bluebells and primroses," he thought. "I'm in a hurry." By the time he had got round the pit, By the time he had got round the down into the... Does that make sense? By the time he had got round and down into the pit, yes it does, and along the bottom to Stig's cave, he was quite out of breath. Stig was there all right. There was a strong smell coming from something gluey he was melting in the fire. He was sticking arrowheads onto their shafts and binding them with catgut, which he was taking from an old broken tennis racket. He looked all ready for the spring hunting season. "Stig!" puffed Barney. "Thank goodness you're here. You've got to help. A man's got into Granny's house, and I'm sure he's a thief, and he'll take all the silver and jewels, and even my money box if he finds it. And I've got 3 and 3pence in it. Oh, what are we going to do, Stig?" 3 and 3pence is old money. 3 and 3pence nowadays is about 16p. It's not very much, is it? But it was back then. Stig just grinned in a friendly way, and Barney began to feel hopeless. It was just like when he was trying to explain about Stig to the grown-ups. They just smiled and said, "Really?" And of course Stig didn't speak English. He didn't speak at all. But he must make him understand. "Enemy!" said Barney fiercely, pointing towards the top of the cliff. "Bad men!" he said, screwing up his face to look wicked. "Fight 'em, Stig! Shoot 'em! See 'em off, Stig!" he urged, making bow and arrow movements and spear movements with his arms. Stig seemed to get the idea. He grinned more than ever and scowled horribly at the same time. Barney looked around for weapons. Leaning against the wall were a new-looking bow and the arrows Stig had been making, some spears, an axe, and the horrible-looking club. Barney picked up the bow and arrows and handed them to Stig, but Stig gave them back to him and took the club instead. "Can I really have the bows and arrows, Stig?" exclaimed Barney. "Gosh, thanks. Come on, we've got to be quick." They ran out to the far end of the pit, and instead of turning right and coming back through the copse to the garden, Barney led the way round into the lane and up the hill towards the house. There at the top, where the lane passed near the chalk cliff, and there was a gap where lorries backed off the road to dump things over the cliff, they found the big black car parked. And there, coming along the lane, were the 2 men in raincoats and dark hats, carrying a large suitcase. Without thinking, Barney fitted an arrow into the bow and shot it. A dark city hat flipped off the head of one of the men and was pinned to the bank of the lane by a flint-tipped arrow. The men stopped. Then they saw Barney. "Now then, kid," said the man, "cut it out. That's dangerous playing with bows and arrows." "You're thieves," said Barney. "I know you've got Granny's silver in that suitcase." The man looked at his companion. "Hear that?" he said. "The kid thinks we're thieves. Look, sonny, we come to look at your Granny's television, didn't we, Sydney? We got our tools in these here cases, haven't we, Sydney?" "That's right," said Sydney. "Plucky little nipper, though, ain't he, Sydney? Looking after his Granny's house while she's away, eh, sonny? I got some toffees in the car, if you'd like some." "I don't like toffees," said Barney, but he was beginning to feel foolish, and he lowered his bow, which was pointing at the man, with another arrow fitted. The man turned round for his hat, which had the arrow stuck in it. He pulled the arrow out, then looked at the sharp flint tip, and his face went white. "You little horror," he snarled at Barney. "Where'd you get them things from, eh? You know you might have killed me!" He broke the arrows across twice and threw the pieces angrily to the ground. "Come on," he said, "and hand over the rest of them things, or there'll be trouble." He came towards Barney with a very nasty expression on his face. Stig had been lurking behind the car, listening to the strange talking and wondering what it was all about. When he saw the man break his precious arrows and come angrily towards Barney, it was enough for him. He let out a sound that was something between a growl and a howl and dashed at the man, raising his horrible club. The two men took one look at this wild figure, dropped their suitcases and ran, with Stig in mad pursuit and Barney running after Stig. "Stig! Stig, come back!" shouted Barney. "It's all a mistake. They're not bad men. They're not thieves. They came to mend the television." But it was no use. What did Stig know about television? Do you think they did come to mend the television? I wonder what they've got in that case. There was a barbed wire fence at the top of the lane, and the men decided to get over it in the hope of escaping from Stig. As the second one scrambled over, his raincoat got caught in the wire. In a panic, he struggled out of the coat and ran off over the field, leaving it on the fence. It was this that saved him from the teeth of Stig's club, because Stig stopped to look at the coat, as if he was not quite sure what part of himself the man had left behind. Barney caught up with him and took hold of his arm. "Stig, Stig, you mustn't chase those men," Barney panted. "I thought they were thieves, but they're not. They might tell a policeman, and there will be awful trouble." But Stig was looking at the coat. As he turned it about, there was a tinkling sound, and a whole lot of shiny things fell out of the pocket onto the ground. Stig pounced on them. With wide-open eyes, picked them up and admired them, turning them to the light. "No, Stig," said Barney, "you can't have them. They're only the man's teaspoons. I expect he was going to have a picnic. Hey, just a minute." Barney pulled Stig by the arm. "Come on," he urged. "We better look at those suitcases." They ran back down the lane to where the suitcases were laying. Barney opened one of them. "Golly," he exclaimed. All Granny's spoons and forks and ladles and things, her jewels and trinkets from her dressing table, one pair of cufflinks belonging to Grandfather, and his own money box. He shook the money box. Did it still sound like 3 shillings and threepence? So they were thieves after all. What should he do now? They might come back to their big black car any time and drive away. How could he stop them? He ran to the car, opened the rear door and looked inside. Under some sacks were more suitcases and bags that clanked when he felt them. Loot from other people's houses. They'd been thieving. Barney sat in the front seat and held the steering wheel. If only he could drive, he could take the car to the police. He took off the handbrake. At least he knew how to do that. The car began to roll backwards towards the edge of the pit. In a panic, Barney opened the door and scrambled out, and the car still moving towards the pit. Barney's mouth was open, and he held his middle as he watched the big car move slowly towards the pit. There was a lurch. As first one wheel, then another, went over the edge. The car bumped down on its underneath. Perhaps it would stop now, but no! The edge of the chalk crumbled. The rear of the car settled lower. The front wheels rose slowly in the air, and with a horrible scraping and grinding, the whole car slid over the edge. There seemed to be quite a long time before Barney heard the crash as the car hit the bottom of the dump. But he was too sick to look. When he opened his eyes, he saw Stig looking over the edge of the cliff, waving and pointing and grinning all over his face as if it was some great animal they had just hunted over the cliff, and he was looking forward to cutting up the meat. Then he was running off round the pit to get to the bottom. Barney remembered the suitcases and hurriedly hid them deep in a bramble patch before running off after Stig. By the time he got to the car, which was lying on its back with its wheels in the air, Stig was already hard at work skinning the leather off the seats and the carpets off the floors. Barney stood helplessly watching. Stig obviously thought that anything thrown into his dump was for him to do with what he liked. But if the men came back and found them stripping the car out, they would be very angry. Then he saw what they would have to do. He got up on the pile of rubbish at the foot of the cliff and started throwing things on top of the dead motor car. Old wash tubs, bedsteads. Gosh, wash tubs doesn't mean washing machines. It only means tubs, like basins you do your washing in. Barney's not strong enough to throw wash tubs on top of the car, washing machines. But bicycle frames he could, and Stig soon got the idea. They were burying the animal to hide it from the enemy. Before long, the car was covered with bits and pieces, branches and moss. Then, as they worked, Stig suddenly froze into stillness and listened. Barney listened too. There were voices coming from the top of the cliff. Barney crept into the inside of the upturned car and beckoned Stig in too. They crouched on the ceiling, looking up at the seats and pedals, and listened. The voices of the two men came down from the top of the cliff. "Well, it ain't here, is it? Go on, have a look." "All right, then, it's gone. What do we do now?" "We got a nice long walk, that's what we've got, mate. Or, if you don't like walking, you can run. You seem to like running all right." "Who likes running? You run too, didn't you?" "You started running first. Got windy because a couple of kids was playing Red Indians, so we've lost the lot, all through you." I tell you, they wasn't kids. One wasn't anyways. "What was it then?" "It was a thing. I tell you, an horrible thing. Out of that there pit, I shouldn't wonder. Come on, let's get out of here. I tell you, I don't like this place. I'm getting back to town if I have to walk all the way." Barney smiled at Stig as the voices faded away. Stig grinned and shook his horrible club. Has come to a stop there. It's not the end of the chapter yet, but I'll read the end of the chapter in the morning. Night-night, sweeties. Love you lots.